Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. So glad you could join us tonight and share your time with us. We've got an amazing show tonight. But first, I do want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. He and his wife, Deb, are native storytellers, and if you Google them online, you'll be able to find some of their material. It's fascinating, it's wonderful, and enlightening, and I think we should all educate ourselves as to how history was preserved before the written word. It is magical in and of itself. Tonight we've got a very cool guest, one that I'm so looking forward to that in 2 weeks he's going to be on the Monday night show with me. So I want to get started fast because all of his material is fascinating, and Mark has got quite a job ahead of him getting as much of the information in there as he possibly can. So, Mark, I'm so excited about this guest. I think it's going to be a fabulous, fabulous show.
Yeah, it's going to be a fabulous show, but it's going to be more of like a mini series.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. I also want to say happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we have. I have like books and notes all over the place. So hopefully we can make this a coherent discussion with the overwhelming amount of information I have all over the place. But we're going to. I think the listeners are going to be impressed. But here when we get started, tonight's show's like. The one we did about a month ago with Dr. Andrew Silverman. When I was just starting out in this radio career, I was working behind the scenes with hosts, and Dr. Silverman had some publications just out with some other researchers, and they were making their appearances on a lot of the internet radio shows about 10 years ago, and I met our guest tonight in the same way, and that was probably around the time The Secret History of Extraterrestrials just came out, and when I saw he had a new book that was going to be released this spring, that was back in like December. So I told Barbara, we need to get Len as a guest. Trust me on this one. You'll really like him. So tonight I'm going to be reviewing a couple of Len's books in anticipation of the release of his Dark Fleet, which comes out next week. And like Barbara said, in a couple weeks, Len and you will be doing just a review of the really fascinating Dark Fleet. Len Kasten is a longtime UFO researcher, member of MUFON and National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, and author of The Secret History of Extraterrestrials, Secret Journey to Planet Serpo, and Alien World Order, and Dark Fleet, which will be available next week from Inner Traditions. Hi, Len. It's nice to reconnect with you, and thank you for being our guest tonight. And
nice to be with you again, Mark.
Yeah. It's been a long time, but this is, I think, about our third show together, and I'm really excited about it. We have so much to cover tonight. I was thinking maybe we just kind of start in the middle, work our way back throughout history, then move forward, back into like the 20th century, and you have so many different threads of extraterrestrial themes that are woven together throughout all your books. That I think we do need two shows, but Roswell really wasn't the first UFO crash landing. Might be one of the most popular ones, but you do talk about the Kingman crash that happened a little bit before Roswell. Can you give us a little bit of information on that case study?
Well, the Kingman crash did not occur before Roswell. It wasn't actually a crash, though. It was a landing. Kingman was a landing.
Okay.
That was an agreed upon. It was an agreed upon landing where the aliens were giving us one of their craft to back engineer. That was a deliberate event.
Okay.
So I think
you're noting that that meeting was kind of like a pattern for the Close Encounters movie. Are there some parallels to it?
Well, Close Encounters had to do with the Serpo, the journey to Planet Serpo. That took place in 1965. That was 1965. That's when we sent 12 people to a distant planet. 12 Americans.
Mm-hmm.
You were aware of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The movie was based on that event. Yeah. Close Encounters was based on that event.
Okay. And so, we have the Kingman case. You cover Roswell, and the military is learning about the anti-gravity information from the craft. You have one surviving ET. What are some of the other bits of information that really stand out from the Roswell incident?
Well, the Roswell Incident was the beginning of all of it. That was the most important event, probably of the 20th century, really. That's what started it all. The fact that one alien survived was the key to everything. And the fact that alien survived is what eventually led to us sending 12 people to Serpo. So it all began with, and we got a lot of technology out of the Roswell Crash, a great deal of technology out of that too, which was distributed to various corporations, and they took out patents on the information, on the technology. So Roswell was extremely important, no question about it. Very important.
Okay, and these few case studies, the first time that the ETs have visited Earth, you make a convincing case that they have been here for a very long period of time. In Alien World Order, you are looking at some of the information told to the Apache people from ETs that they encountered. What was said in those discussions?
Are we talking about Alien World Order, that book?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you want to jump to that? Head to that one?
No, sure. That'd be a good place to start to show how long they've been here and why they came to Earth.
Well, you're talking about the incident whereby there was a crash on an Indian reservation, and
yes,
6 young Indian boys nursed the crash survivor back to health.
Yeah.
And that became the story that about the reptilians. That's how they learned about the reptilians in the first place, because the story that was told to them about the ancient reptilian culture was passed on, and from those 6 young men. So that was a whole different story than Serpo, and I wanted to I wanted to talk about that subject so that it could be understood where the reptilians came from in the first place, how they got here. That was the point of that discussion. Because
let's do that.
That was the first time we learned about it. Actually, that became a book by Robert Morningsky, but it didn't. He was an Apache Native American, but he also was very educated. He had a master's degree in religious studies. He's the one that first wrote about that incident that occurred on the Indian reservation, and that was the origin of what we know about the ancient history of the reptilians. Before that event, we didn't really know anything about them at all. So that's why that was an important event.
Okay, and what were some of the events going on at on other planets that brought them to Earth? Like you cover some of the patriarchal cultures, and there's some disagreements that were going on.
No. The history of the reptilians on this planet is ancient, very ancient. They were here before we were. They were here before we were, and that crash in which those young men learned about the reptilians and their history was the first information we really had on who they were, what they did, and why they were here. That's why that was important, and that's why I put that in the first chapter. Because I mean, we've had people like David Icke talking about the reptilians lately, and other authors are writing about them, but nobody ever seems to know where they came from or how they got here. And that's why I thought it was important to go back into history. And the only history we had was that book that was written by Robert Morningsky. And Morningsky got the information from the survivor of the crash on that Indian reservation. His name was Beck T. And so that's why I had to get into that ancient history so that we know more about the reptilians who are, of course, still around here. They're still here. They have been for thousands of years. That's the reason I started out on that information.
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, you cover that the universe was ruled by a matriarchy, and there was the Night of Tears. All that was reptilian history on their planet, which they called the Green World, and that's very ancient history. I wanted the reading public to understand where the reptilians came from, what they were all about. If all we had to go on was what David Icke told us, then it wasn't enough information, and it wasn't enough to let us know just who they are and what they're capable of and where they come from. So that was the whole point of writing the whole first part of my book, Alien World Order, about the reptilians and about that crash in the desert on the Indian reservation. That's why I wanted to get into that. Stuart Sverdlow talked about it too, but not in great detail. And you open your book with photos of the reptilian statues. Those have been dated to deep antiquity.
Are we talking about Alien World Order now, basically? That was the book. That's the book you want to discuss at this point?
Yeah, the photos do open up Alien World Order.
Right. Yeah, it was necessary. I thought it was necessary to discuss the history of the reptilians because David Icke did not get into that in his writings, and he's written 5 or 6 books about the reptilians. I think you know that, right? Are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know that.
Yeah.
So people keep saying, well, where did they come from? Who are they? I just wanted to make the point that they're very ancient. They've been in this galaxy a long time, and they were here long before we were. They had this planet all to themselves for 100,000 years at least before there were any humans on this planet. Although there were humans in the solar system, but not on Earth. They were on Mars, and they were on a huge planet called Maldek. But they were not here on Earth when they arrived. So they came here in a large planet-sized spaceship. They took the dinosaurs with them because the dinosaurs were their food source, and they brought them with them. And they settled here and made this their planet. And for a long time, they had no interference.
Okay, and they eventually settled the continents that would be known to us today as Atlantis and Mu?
No, they didn't settle Atlantis. They settled on Lemuria, or Mu, yes.
Oh, okay.
Which was
Lemuria.
which was in the Pacific Ocean, a very large continent in the Pacific, which are sometimes called Lemuria, sometimes called Mu, M-U. And they lived there for a long time, and they had space travel. They had spaceships. They could get back and forth out of the solar system. Everything was fine. The problem was that when they first got here, they destroyed a huge planet between Jupiter and Mars called Maldek. They vaporized it literally. It became some series of broken up fragments of a planet, and hundreds of thousands of humans that were living on Maldek were killed. And many of them had escaped already to Mars, but it might have even been millions. We don't know the numbers. We don't really know the numbers. That was their first act when they arrived in the solar system, was to destroy Maldek. And the remnants of Maldek became the asteroid belt. We now call that the asteroid belt. So that was their initial act upon arriving in the solar system, was to destroy that planet and to annihilate millions of humans who were living on that planet. But that was nothing to them, because they've done that before. They did that in other solar systems. To them, killing humans was just sport. They didn't care. And then they settled on Lemuria, made that their continent. There was another continent that also emerged out of the water at that time. That eventually became Atlantis, but we'll talk about that later, because for a long time it didn't matter. They lived here alone with their dinosaurs for a long time, before a single human set foot on this planet.
Okay, and what was the Lemurian culture like?
Well, that's what Robert Morningsky discussed. He talked about the kingdom they had in Orion and in Draco, and how eventually the queens took over. The females took over their culture on those planets. So that's why the first third of that book is all about their history on their other planet, which Morningsky called the Green World, and how they evolved on that planet before they even came to this solar system. Because they had space travel, they had space sharing technology for thousands of years before they came here, and they've been all over the solar system, traveled all over the solar system, and all over the galaxy in their spacecraft before they even arrived here. And so it was important to get that history across, to fill in some of the information that David Icke really did not cover, because he didn't have the information. The information came from Robert Morningsky and his book, and that's where I got it.
Oh, and you know, with the destruction of the planet that made the asteroid belt, you are giving us, establishing a pattern of, reptilians had an aggressive behavior.
Absolutely. That's all they know is domination. Yes.
Yeah.
They have no regard. They have no regard for the human race whatsoever.
Okay. So when
the first contact between the humans and the reptilians occurred in a solar system or a star system called Lyra, which is many light years away. I think something like 50 light years away from our star system, and that was the first time that they cruised the galaxy. They had been cruising the galaxy in their starships for many thousands of years, but that was the first time they encountered humans. Was in the system of Lyra, and the humans were living peacefully in that star system. They had an agricultural civilization. They were spiritual, but they didn't have very many defensive facilities. They weren't really good in high technology in terms of weaponry, and so when the Reptilians arrived there, they basically just destroyed 3 planets of humans completely and slaughtered about 50 million humans. That was the first encounter between humans and reptilians. That's where it all started. Before that, there was no connection between the reptilians and the human race. So
okay, and go ahead, Len.
Well, I just wanted to get into that piece of history.
Okay. Do you want to add to it? That fine. It just that what more follow-up questions? I just want you to finish your point.
Well, there were humans living here in this solar system before the reptilians got here, but they were living on 2 planets. One was Maldek and one was Mars. There were human civilizations on both of those planets, and when the reptilians arrived here, they wound up destroying Maldek, and they stripped the atmosphere off of Mars when they went by it in their spacecraft. So the humans on Mars had to take refuge under the surface and couldn't live on the surface. And the humans on Maldek were slaughtered. Millions were slaughtered. And they then landed on Earth and basically lived here peacefully for 100,000 years or so before any other humans showed up. And the reason they slaughtered all the humans here was they wanted them out of the way. They wanted the solar system. Basically, it was an operation to take over the solar system. And that was what they were doing here. And they do that all over the galaxy.
Okay, and what was the incident that brought about the destruction of Lemuria and the migration of the survivors?
Well, the survivors from Lyra, the human survivors from Lyra, scattered all over the galaxy and went to other places. They went to 110 different star systems and settled there. And they stayed in touch with each other and became what we now know as the Galactic Federation. And they developed weaponry, they developed high technology, and they communicated with each other and many different planets in this galaxy. So because they started something called the Galactic Federation, when the reptilians arrived here and slaughtered all the humans on Maldek, the Federation decided to take action. They decided they were not going to let them have this solar system. And so they sent a very fierce race of humans from the Pleiades, called the Atlans, to confront the reptilians on Earth. The Atlans arrived here and settled on the continent we now know as Atlantis. And the wars broke out immediately between the reptilians and the humans at that point. And the Atlanteans had a very, very high technology. They were able to weaken the underpinnings of the continent of Lemuria, and eventually it sank. And the Reptilians had to take refuge underground. And that was when Atlantis began, and a very, very high culture eventually took place on Atlantis, and there was no interference from the Reptilians. They were living underground. But then the wars started, and the Reptilians actually had the technology to sink Atlantis, which they did. That was basically, they struck back. And fortunately, the psychics and the shamans on Atlantis knew that it was coming. They warned them, everybody, and there was mass migrations before Atlantis went down. But the major part of Atlantis went down in one night. But by that time, humans were scattered all over the globe, and they started civilizations in Egypt, in Tibet, all over. So that was the beginning of that situation. That's how Lemuria sank, and also Atlantis. Both of them went underwater.
Okay. And some of the subterranean lairs that were established were in Antarctica, Tibet, and India.
I'm not sure about Antarctica, but there were human colonies all over the planet. The humans that escaped from Atlantis started wisdom schools because they were very highly evolved spiritually. They started wisdom schools in Tibet and India, and underground also all over the planet. There were many survivors. There were many human survivors, but Atlantis itself was gone. And so the Reptilians lived underground and started a whole civilization underground. They started a complete civilization. They had high-speed technology, high-speed trains, and they had the ability to go in and out of portals and go out into the galaxy in their spaceships. So they were very comfortable living underground, while our civilization was basically primitive on Earth, although there were no further confrontations at that point. We can get into that if you'd like to.
Oh, sure. There's also the Society of Green Men. They would have an influence as well on world history. I just wanted to cover them at some point in this
now you're getting closer.
section.
Now you're getting closer to World War II. Now we're talking closer to World War II. But at that point, with the Reptilians living underground and a very, 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 very primitive human civilization on the surface, the Federation decided that they wanted to convene a council, which they did on the planet Hatona in Andromeda, to discuss the situation on Earth. And at that point, the Reptilians were invited to that council, and an agreement was reached whereby the Federation decided they were going to create an entirely new human race on Earth, a new race. And the Reptilians agreed to that, but the agreement included the fact that the new race was going to actually consist of the reptilian, what we now call the reptilian brain, was part of the arrangement that was agreed to. That the new race would have what's called the reptilian brain, and the reptilians believed they could manage the new race from under the surface because they would have a reptilian brain, and that was the beginning of the so-called Garden of Eden, and that was the human race that we're now talking about, which we evolved from, that we now call Homo sapiens sapiens. That's how it started. It started with that agreement. And so the Federation basically made a deal with them that there would be a new human race on this planet, and the reptilians agreed to it because they felt sure that they could basically enslave the new race anyway. And that's where we come from. We come from that arrangement, that deal that was made. Genetically speaking, the new race had the DNA of 12 human civilizations that were in the Federation. They combined the DNA of 12 human races and created a new race that became the so-called Garden of Eden creation story. And we evolved from that arrangement, and now we're 7 billion strong.
And you also note that there were 22 corrections to human DNA over a 50,000-year period.
Yes, exactly. The Federation continued to perfect the human race with 22 DNA corrections. David Wilcock talks about that. Corey Good, Stephen Swerdlow. We were slowly made into a more and more intelligent species. Started out rather ignorant, but the basic human DNA was there. And slowly they made 22 corrections to the DNA over a period of thousands of years. And so the human race of today evolved from those beginnings.
Okay, Len, since we were just talking about Atlantis and Egypt, you also draw our attention to Edgar Casey's information about Atlantis and Ignatius Donnelly's book entitled Atlantis. What is so important about their views of this early advanced culture?
Well, the Atlanteans were not created by the aliens. The Atlanteans came from a different star system. Remember, I said that the Federation decided to send a race of Atlans here to confront the Reptilians, which they did, and the Reptilians went underground. The Atlans created a golden civilization here. When the Reptilians went underground, the Atlans had the surface world to themselves, and they were very advanced, very spiritual. They had high-tech weaponry. They had high-tech civilization before it was sunk, before Atlantis went down. That was not the same human race as the human race that was created by that agreement at the Council of Hatona. You know, millions of Atlanteans were slaughtered in that when Atlantis went down, and so they scattered through all over the planet. many of them left the planet. And that's when the council decided to create the new human race, and the reptilians agreed to that. And that was the agreement. As long as they could get the new humans to have the reptilian brain, they were pleased with the arrangement, because they didn't feel threatened at all at that point. So that's the race we came from. We're the Homo sapiens sapiens. The Atlanteans were a totally different human race. They were much more advanced than we are, even now.
And you also cover that some of these, like Egypt, some of these early advanced civilizations really just emerged advanced. Like, there wasn't really like a stepping stones to get to an advanced state of civil society. It was just like all of a sudden they just appeared almost overnight, very advanced.
Well, the human race as we know it, the human race that we call Homo sapiens sapiens is only about 50,000 years old, and it started really just before Atlantis even went down. So at that point, there were humans on Atlantis, and there were new humans starting to multiply in the Fertile Crescent over in Turkey. That's where the Garden of Eden was located, so-called Garden of Eden. And but after that, our friends, the other humans in the galaxy, they did interfere and made more DNA corrections as we grew to the new human race, until we reached what we now call Homo sapiens sapiens. The early humans could never have mastered the kind of things we take for granted, using automobiles and cell phones. They never would have been able to understand how to do any of that. But after they made these 22 corrections, we gradually became more and more sophisticated and highly intelligent and technological. The goal was to create a human race on this planet that would eventually be able to confront the reptilians all over the galaxy. And really, that's what they want. That's what they want us to do. That's what they want us to do. That's what the Federation. That was the purpose of the Federation creating the human race in the first place.
And some of the remnants of the advanced Atlantean culture are like the Sphinx and pyramids. You're covering the Osirian at Abydos. These are some very ancient structures. What importance did they have for the Egyptians, descendants of Atlantis?
Well, Egypt was the main colony that escaped from Atlantis. The Egyptians were basically Atlantean. That's why they were able to build such huge monuments, and they had a very sophisticated culture in ancient Egypt. That they had high technology. They understood DNA. They actually created creatures that were part animal and part human. That was all done by the Atlanteans, who emigrated out of Atlantis to Egypt before it sank, before Atlantis went down. So, basically you had the new humans that originated in eastern Turkey, and you had the Atlanteans still basically interacting with each other. As we became more and more, as we, the Homo sapiens became more sophisticated, more intelligent, and were more able to create a high civilization, the Atlanteans just stayed out of the picture, and basically many of them left the planet entirely.
Okay. And when we're talking about the reptilians, are they another name for the Nephilim? Are we talking like the biblical Nephilim is basically a summary of what you've been covering? It's just another name for the same group of people?
Well, there were giants in the early stages on this planet. It's in the Bible. It talks about the fact that there were giants on the earth. They were probably the Atlanteans. And the culture that started in ancient Greece and Egypt was mainly Atlantean. So those stories, those so-called ancient stories, really talking about migrations from Atlantis, humans that escaped from Atlantis, and founded ancient Egypt, and also populated ancient Greece and Cyprus and those areas in the Mediterranean.
When we look at the surviving structures, and like the Sphinx, there are also numerous examples of the Egyptian obelisks, and we have was it the Washington Monument is patterned after an Egyptian obelisk. What about the one of the tallest structures in Washington D.C.? What is that symbol? What does what's the cultural significance of that symbol that is found around a wide portion of the world? How does that all relate to Egypt?
Well, the obelisks were basically erected. They were really used for. They were really a high-tech network that had the ability to communicate with each other. That probably was based on Atlantean technology, and almost all of ancient Egypt was basically based on Atlantean technology. That's why they were able to build those huge pyramids and the huge temples. The new human race, which was starting to develop in Turkey, really was not involved in that. And so we had two different cultures, really. We still had the Atlantean survivors still on this planet, still living basically in colonies, and then we had the new humans developing in what is now Eastern Turkey. Actually, it's Western Turkey, really. That became the Garden of Eden. And that became Homo sapiens sapiens. That's us. And our Atlantean forefathers, if you want to look at it that way, helped us along as best they could in any way they could. They started the mystery schools, what we call the mystery schools, and where many humans went for spiritual help in the Himalayan mountains and other places, other places that were basically in high places. So the human race of today, really, we have them to thank for bringing us along to the point that we are today. And they did. The other ET civilizations did come and help advance us with these 22 corrections, which David Wilcock talks about also. 22 corrections were made to our DNA over thousands of years to bring us to the point that we are at today and able to handle the technology that we now have. Early humans could never have handled the technology that we have. Computers, high-speed transportation. They would basically had no ability to do any of that. They wouldn't understand how to do that. But slowly and surely, with the 22 corrections, the human race of today has evolved to the point where now we're almost ready to leave the planet and start traveling in outer space ourselves. We're just at that point now. But the reptilians are trying to inhibit us from doing that. They don't want us to do that. They want to keep us here.
Well, and you do note that Christianity was developed to stop the reptilians, or it was a way to battle them. Since we've been talking a little bit about the like the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, what's the role of Christianity?
Well, the Federation wanted to. The reptilians have no concept of love or compassion. They don't understand that. It's not in their DNA. They just know how to dominate and control. The Federation decided that the human race is capable of love. We have heart chakra. We're capable of love and compassion. We were created that way. That's the reason we were created that way. And so a teacher was necessary. And the Federation did send the person we now call Jesus here to develop that and teach that. And that was Christianity, and I talk about that in my book. Mm-hmm. That was to help us to become the kind of race that we are now. Compassion, love is the most important aspect of the human race. The reptilians have no concept of love. They don't understand it. They don't care about it. So it was necessary for us to have a teacher, and the Federation sent the person we know as Jesus and also Mary Magdalene to do that, and he succeeded. He succeeded in starting the religion we now call Christianity. And it's made us more civilized. Before that, we were not. We were rather uncivilized. Christianity has helped civilize the human race.
Okay, that's. I don't think we've had it put that way on any other Nightlight show. That's a really interesting perspective, and that was furthered for a few hundred more years with the Merovingians.
Well, out of Christianity came two branches: the Pauline branch, that was basically in Rome, and the French Merovingian kings. They were more actual Christians, what we call Christians, than the Roman Christians, because the early Roman Church was dominated by the Reptilians, whereas the one in France developed more freely and became true Christians because they allowed for the feminine principle, whereas the Roman Christians were male dominated and misogynistic. While the that developed out of the Roman Christian Church is basically all male, no real place for females. Whereas the Merovingian branch of Christianity developed along the line of where priestesses and highly evolved women became part of that culture. Ultimately, the two clashed, and the Roman Christians, which became the Roman Empire, really slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Cathars in France, and that was the end of that civilization. And so the Pope became the leader of the Catholic Church and leader of Christianity. But that's a whole other story.
Okay, so you note that during the time of Hatshepsut in Egypt, there were some opposing philosophies that began to emerge. Can you tell us a little bit about those and the impact that they have on us today?
See, I'm not sure what you're referring to, really.
Well,
that.
She was a female leader who hated war, and she wanted to restore the divine feminine philosophy, and she was at odds with
Pharaoh.
Shamsu Hor.
Yeah, that's right. And they eventually killed her, basically, because she was against war, and the males were warlike, and she tried to do away with war, but they did away with her instead. Her temple still exists in Egypt. I've been there, and it's a beautiful temple.
Is that the one that has like a really long facade, and there are a lot of columns, and it's carved into like a hillside or a rock outcropping? Is that one?
Yeah, I think that basically described it. Yeah, and they get millions of people go there to visit that temple. It's a beautiful temple.
Okay, so and that's the one dedicated to her. She's buried there.
I'm trying to remember where her burial site was. She was not buried in the Valley of the Kings. We know that. And I'm not sure that they know where her tomb is. I don't think they've discovered it. I'm not sure about that.
Oh, but it's just a temple to her. But so
she had it built.
What?
She had that temple built. She had it built. It's up to did have it built. She had a lot of power at one point.
Okay, and was her deposition a result of the reptilian planning, or
the reptilians basically took over the male-dominated Egyptian culture, and the pharaoh became all important. They were just like they also did the same thing. They denigrated the female, the feminine influence, and the male pharaohs ruled with an iron hand. And basically that led to the downfall of Egypt.
Well, okay, that's just some really interesting information, and just
the reptilians could not forget what happened in Draco, where they originated from, where the queens, or Orion rather, where the queens took over, and they subjugated the males, and so the reptilians on this planet had decided that they would never allow that to happen here, that the males would stay in power, and most of the reptilians are very misogynistic, very anti-female, to this day.
And that's. I don't think we really take into consideration that these behaviors that we see, just very aggressive behaviors. We see on different news stories actually are a long established pattern of reptilian behavior, as well as the mind control that they have established, as well as other types of methods of controlling people, like the banking system. You make us aware of.
Well, the male, the basic power structure on the planet is male dominated. It's patriarchal. Right. It's misogynistic because the reptilians are behind it, and they elevate the male over the female, and so that's why we've got this current thing going on. The warfare basically between the males and the females is finally the females are finally starting to emerge as a power group. But for a long time, because of reptilian control, they didn't. The men were basically in charge, and had been. And the reptilians were determined not to let the women emerge and influence the civilization, because they wanted a warlike civilization here. They wanted the males to slaughter each other, basically, so that they would stay in control. By controlling the men, they control the warlike abilities of the whole human race, and that's why we've been killing each other for thousands of years. The women are starting to emerge now, and they may eventually that culture may eventually emerge, and it probably will. More women in government, more women in power, more women in business. It was a Catholic Church that basically was highly male dominated that spread that influence, unfortunately, and subjugated women. That's changing. That's now changing, fortunately.
How how do we identify the reptilians? And I'm sure they've been hybrid over time, but are there any pure reptilians? How do we recognize those that they have under their influence? Are they like all in banking or politics?
The people that control our civilization are the so-called Illuminati. They are basically do the work of the reptilians. The banking system, media, all of that is controlled by the Illuminati. They start the wars. They control us through banking, through media, through adulteration of our food and water, chemtrails, all of that. That's basically a male patriarchal system. It was very evident in World War II when Hitler. It was very obvious that the Nazi civilization that he created was very strongly male dominated. They had no basic respect for women at all. That was all basically because they were controlled by the reptilians. And Hitler had made a pact with the reptilians. And as a result of that arrangement, the reptilians gave them high technology. But ultimately, they still couldn't handle it, fortunately. But basically, the subjugation of women, wherever you see that pattern, such as it was in Rome also, you know that it's a reptilian influence, because the reptilians have no regard for the female. They don't want this civilization to repeat what happened in their original world on Draco and in Orion, where the women took over and the queens took over the power structure. So that's why we're living in such a patriarchal social structure here, and have been for many, many years.
Okay, so Len, since you just brought up Hitler and the Nazis, do you want to talk a little bit about their influence, or how they became influenced by the reptilians? You go into detail about Karl Haushofer and what he learned on his trip to Asia.
Well, Haushofer was one of the brains of the development of the Nazi philosophy, but he actually wrote the book Mein Kampf for Hitler while Hitler was in jail. Hitler was not smart enough to write a book like that. Haushofer was an intellectual. He was a academician, and he used to visit Hitler in jail and helped him write that book, Mein Kampf, which became, of course, very popular. And Haushofer also was one of the ones that traveled to various places all over the world, studying other ancient cultures. So I think that's what you're talking about. That right? Is that what you're interested in? Yeah.
Yeah. It's just interesting that the development of the pattern of thought that Haushofer learned and then transmitting it, and all of the destruction it caused.
Well, Haushofer was one of Hitler's intellectual teachers, so to speak. Haushofer had been living in Japan prior to World War II, and he became a member of the Green Dragon Society in Japan, which was a secret organization, again very male dominated. And so he was there on a consulting assignment to help the Japanese develop their cannons and their artillery. But ultimately, he became a member of the Green Dragon Society. He was probably one of the only Westerners ever to be admitted into the Green Dragon Society in Japan. And he came back. He came to Germany and became a professor at one of the colleges in Germany, and he helped Hitler write Mein Kampf. And in the end, the Nazis killed him. They didn't actually kill him. They put him in a concentration camp, he and his wife, and ultimately they both committed suicide, he and his wife. So it was a typical way that the Nazis would handle anybody. Didn't matter. They had no loyalty to anybody. That was basically the Nazi approach to life. So the story of Karl Haushofer is a very interesting story, and I thought it was necessary to cover it in my book.
Oh, it was very interesting, and I think it did an excellent job of delineating the progression of thought.
Yeah, there was no academic. There was no academic life in Nazi Germany, really. People like Haushofer were necessary to help bring them along. But basically, the Nazis were so dominated by the reptilian philosophy that they had no respect for academics at all.
You bring up the point. It was more like indoctrination than making personal realizations of some truth.
Yeah, I mean, a man like Haushofer, who was highly educated, but he also recognized in Hitler the kind of leader that he needed, that they wanted to establish the what they hoped would be a German empire. But as we know, did not turn out that way. So in the end, he realized what a monster he had created. He and his wife both killed themselves. He hung himself, and she shot herself, or he shot himself. I can't remember how it worked out. They realized that they were really basically what they were trying to do in Nazi Germany was to carry out the orders that were given to them by the Green Dragon Society, and to create a leader, like a Hitler-like leader in Germany, and then link up with the Japanese, which they did eventually. But when he realized what a monster they had created in Hitler, they killed themselves, because he was not at all what they had in mind, really.
So, to show the reptilian influence and their nefarious plans. Germany began colonizing Antarctica in 1938. Is pretty early on in the during the Nazi era, for them to be taking such a bold was the Antarctica deal all inspired by reptilian concepts?
Yes, absolutely. When you realize that the Germans colonized Antarctica in 1938, they sent a ship called the Schwabenland there with scientists and agriculturists, and their intent was to start a new colony in Antarctica in 1938, the one full year before they started World War II. And so you have to ask, why would they devote so many resources to that concept, that project, 6,000 miles away across the Atlantic, when they were getting ready to invade Poland and start World War II? It just didn't make any sense until you understood that their basic intention was to start a colony in Antarctica that they could use as a base to explore other planets. The reptilians were going to help them with their technology, with their aerospace technology in Antarctica, and that's what happened. I get into all of that in my new book, Dark Fleet. I don't cover that in Alien World Order, but I do in the new book. The settlement of Mars and the Moon by the Nazis is covered in my new book, Dark Fleet.
Yeah, well, we won't go into a whole a lot of information about that. We'll say that for your return appearance in a couple weeks. But it's really some fascinating information about what you're discovering, what was going on at that time. The concept of space travel and like the late 1930s. We could leave that there and maybe return to your secret journey to Planet Serpo, and get into other intergalactic voyages. But so outer space travel really isn't something that's started with President Kennedy wanting to put someone on the moon by the end of the 60s. It had been done. President Kennedy wanted to.
The first moon landing was in 1942 by the Germans. The German landing on the Nazi landing on the moon was in 1942, and they started building their colony on the moon from that point on, and going underground. So the what we now call the Lunar Operations Command on the moon was started at that point. And they had the technology way ahead of everybody else because the reptilians were helping them. So,
okay. And the technology. It's really some amazing information you have about the Werner von Braun's engineering of the propulsion systems and rockets.
The goal of the Nazis from the very beginning was not to destroy America; it was to take it over, and to harness our technology and our ability to our manufacturing capability and our advanced systems. The goal was not to destroy America. That's why they never really invaded America. They could have. There were ways they could have sent huge bombers over here. That's why they invaded Russia instead. Their goal was to take over America, not to destroy it. And that's basically what they did. And they put one of their own Nazis in command of our space program, Werner von Braun. He had been a Nazi colonel, and in 1960 he took over our space program. And there were Nazis in all over our large corporations, aerospace corporations. Operation Paperclip. The CIA brought over many Nazis here and cleaned up their records and scrubbed their records. Truman said there would be no Nazis in our scientists in our system, but they just destroyed their records and they became part of our system, took over large corporations and everything, and that's what happened. They got involved in the aerospace industry big time.
And since we're talking about President Truman and President Kennedy, how did these earlier UFO landings and presidential meetings with the ETs, how did all those encounters lead up to the exchange program with that you document in your secret history of Project Serpo?
Well, it all started with Roswell. The Roswell Crash was the beginning of everything. That our space program, we developed, we obtained a lot of technology from that one crash because one of the aliens survived, and he was sent to Los Alamos, and we worked with him for 5 years before he finally died in 1952, and the arrangement to have an exchange program with his planet was made before he died, and but the aliens insisted that we wait 10 years before they would be willing to do the exchange program, and so we had to wait until 1965 before we could send our 12 people to their planet Serpo, and we did. They stayed there 13 years, actually, not 10 years. They're supposed to stay there just for 10 years, but they ended up staying there 13 years because they lost track of time. All the time devices that they brought with them were not working any longer. So they really didn't know what year it was on Earth. Finally, in 1978, they were sent back, but only 7 of them returned. Three of them died, and 2 of them decided to stay there. 2 Americans decided to stay there on Serpo. So 7 returned in 1978.
Okay,
and that's what the movie Close Encounters was based on that whole incident. If you recall, in that movie there were 12 men and 1 woman, 11 men and 1 woman lined up in orange jumpsuits. Do you remember that scene at the end?
Towards the end of the movie, yeah.
Right. So Spielberg knew about this whole program, and that's what he was trying to portray.
Okay. Well, you do cover that President Kennedy did create the DIA to make intelligence more accountable to the public.
Exactly. Yeah, he had a clash with the CIA, and after the Bay of Pigs, he told them that he was going to break the CIA up into 1,000 pieces. And of course, they never let him do that. They got to him first, thanks to Allen Dulles. And but part of his plan to destroy the CIA was to create an organization that would be more accountable to him, and that became the DIA. That he and McNamara decided to start another intelligence agency called the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. That was started by Kennedy in 1962, I believe. And ultimately, the DIA became very powerful, and they had a different agenda than the CIA anyway. But the CIA remained under the control of Allen Dulles, who basically had Nazi sympathies. So it was the DIA that basically released the information that the Serpo story is based on. It was because they released that information that I was able to write the book. If they hadn't done that, that story would never have seen the light of day.
Oh, yeah, that your Serpo book is just really interesting. For example, you have all the training that went. The 12 people went through being moved around to the different bases. The diaries of all that's worth spending some time discussing. So how were these 12 astronauts chosen to for this exchange program for them to go to Serpo?
They were not really astronauts. They were simply ex-military people that carefully chosen. They put out a call. They put ads in all the military newspapers for volunteers. They told them that basically it was a top secret mission. They didn't tell them anything about it. Once they got into the program and they were trained, then they started to learn that they were actually going to go to another star system. But in the beginning, they didn't understand what they were supposed to do. But the leader of the next Air Force colonel was the guy in charge, and he was given the information from the beginning. But he became the team commander, and they were trained. I think it was basically for a full 6 months at the CIA headquarters in Virginia, near Williamsburg, Virginia, and it was very intensive training. Each one of them had a different specialty. One was oriented to medical problems. There were 2 pilots. It's all covered in the book. We know it all because they had a website called serpo.org that had about 13,000 words. It was complete coverage of the whole story, and I got a lot of information from that website as well as other sources in order to write the book. But they were initially going to include 2 women in the group, but that changed. They had originally started with 16 people. There were 12 people and 4 alternates. I think the women were in the alternate group, but in the end they decided to send only 12 men. And each one had a separate specialty. And it was quite a story. They went there and they were treated very nicely by the aliens on Serpo. They were given complete freedom to travel all over the planet. They gave them any information they wanted in terms of the propulsion of the spacecraft. They brought all that back with them in 1978, and that's really one of the things that helped jumpstart our space program. The information they brought back with them was invaluable.
Okay, and what they were going, was it 240 trillion miles from Earth?
Yes.
And they were gone for that was a 13-year round trip.
No,
expedition.
The journey to Serpo only took 9 months. 9 months, I believe. I can't remember that now. They went through what we call a wormhole. That's how they were able to cover the huge distance to Serpo, and they were on the alien craft, which was operated by the aliens themselves. They were taken on as passengers, and they were treated very nicely the entire journey. But it was not an easy thing. It was not an easy thing for them to adapt to, though. It was very difficult. They were given free reign of the spaceship. They were able to go and see the engine room, how it was handled, and they were given free reign to travel on Serpo anywhere they wanted. They brought a lot of transportation and stuff with them, and they went up into the northern hemisphere, down into the southern hemisphere. They traveled all over the planet when they got there.
Has since publishing this book, has any new information come to light about the Project Serpo expedition?
Well, let's keep in mind that it wasn't one journey. Okay, the Evens, we call them the Evens. They've been back 9 times since that journey. We've established a diplomatic relationship with the Even civilization, and we may even have a colony there. My guess is that we probably do have a secret colony on their planet to this day. So that's been an ongoing connection, and a lot of our technology that we've developed has been based on what we learned from the Evens about their propulsion system, about their biotechnology, the ability they have to combine DNA and create different creatures. We learned all of that in that mission. So it was definitely advantageous to our technology, and has a lot to do with the fact that we now have the ability to do all those things.
And you note that Carl Sagan may have been involved with this project. That's a big name in late 20th century science and astronomy.
Carl Sagan was consulted. Yes, he wrote a long dissertation as part of his contribution to the whole Serpo story. He was aware of it. In fact, the book that he claims was fiction, Contact, was based in large part on what he learned from that information. But of course, he could never say that. He could never tell anybody that.
I remember seeing that movie. When did that come out? Like about 20 years ago?
Something like that. I think Jodie Foster was in it. I believe Jodie Foster was in it. Yeah. And yeah.
Yeah.
It was. He claimed it was fiction, but a lot of it was based on what he had learned from the Serpo story, because he was given access to top secret information. He didn't want to endanger his position at Cornell, where he was the head of the astronomy department, and he couldn't tell them anything, so he had to keep it top secret.
And there was a scene in the movie that was seemed like it was describing a wormhole, but you did mention that just a few minutes ago, that the Serpo travelers did get there through wormholes. Is that the first time that people learned of wormholes?
Well, when you say people, who are you referring to?
Just like the regular lay person. Was that concept known by government agencies prior to Project Serpo?
I believe it
like
was
by Einstein.
I'm not sure about Einstein. I do know that that we knew a lot about interstellar travel very early in the game, and we understood that what Corey Goode now refers to it as the cosmic web. So that's basically what he's talking about. Wormholes are really part of what he calls the cosmic web, which are connections between all the planets, basically. And if you go through a wormhole, you're going through the cosmic web, and you go through instantaneously. It's instantaneous travel. So we learned a lot of that. We learned a lot of that information even before the Serpo story. We knew a lot of that. We had spies working over in Germany when Germany was developing their space program and their rocketry, and they were basically naval assets. And William Tompkins talked about that in his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials. So we knew a lot of that already, even before we sent that contingent to Serpo. As a matter of fact, we were already manufacturing spaceships secretly in the 50s and 60s. So they didn't go to Serpo until 1965. By that time, we already had a lot of information about space travel and wormholes. It was top secret, of course.
Mm-hmm. And in your Project Serpo book, you do cover those boxes worn on their belts, and I was just wondering, was there any type of connection to those purses or handbags that people talk about? It's like, what are these devices that these hybrid animals are holding in the Sumerian artwork? Is there some kind of connection? I was just wondering if there's some.
You talk about the cross. You talking about the ancient holding the cross, holding the cross in their hand? Is that what you're talking about?
It's more like the handbag. Have you seen that? There's like a little purse or something. I was just wondering, is there some type of connection? I was just kind of thinking off the top of my head. I know it's the boxes on the belts are in your Serpo book.
Oh, you talking about Serpo? The Serpo?
Yeah.
That's not. Well, they were just wore on their belt. They were concerned about radiation. They were radiation counters because they did absorb a lot of radiation on Serpo, and unfortunately, I think most of them did die basically young because of that. After they got back, is that what you're talking about? Radiation. Yeah. Well, that was all about.
Huh.
They had devices.
Okay.
They had devices to measure radiation on Serpo. There was much more radiation on Serpo than there is on this planet. They had two suns in the sky. They had two suns in the sky, and there was a lot of radiation.
I was just going to say that. The diaries cover the two suns. They were also dealing with it was about 140 degrees during the day, and
it was very hot.
Basically,
very hot on the planet. Yep, very hot. In fact, it was too hot for them. They had to live underground for a long time, but the aliens built them a colony in the northern hemisphere eventually, where the temperature was much more moderate, and they could live comfortably there. But for the first 5 years, they lived in that basically the part of the planet that was excessively hot, and they had to spend a lot of their time underground to stay cool. But eventually they did move to what they call Little Montana, which was very moderate temperature with lakes and pine trees, and it was much more comfortable for them. So they spent the last 8 years there in that part of the planet.
Okay, and what's some of the information that was learned from this Project Serpo was the weightless technology that was also used to build Stonehenge and some of the monuments in Egypt. What was this?
Yeah, the Evens had anti-gravity technology. They used it, and we learned a lot about it from them. But of course, it was top secret here on this planet. But we learned a lot about anti-gravity from them, and I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Right. That's exactly it. It was just more very interesting information that you culled from your sources to show how important this the intergalactic visit was?
Oh yeah, it was extremely important, and we learned a lot. That's why they kept it top secret. Whatever we didn't learn from Roswell, we definitely learned from Serpo. In fact, a lot of it was about biotechnology, because they knew they were cloning already, and they were creating creatures that were. One of the incidents on Serpo was when the captain, the team leader, discovered that they had taken the dead body of one of the Americans and combined it with one of the Evens and created a creature that was part Even and part human. And he was so revolted by that he said in his diary, he said, "I have seen the dark side of this civilization." But what he thought was evil was really not evil. It was just part of it. That was part of their science program. They're creating creatures that were combined, and they took the parts of the dead American and created this half even, half human. But he thought it was evil, and he said, "I've seen the dark side of this civilization," in his diary.
Yeah, and what you just mentioned about number 3, the passenger 308 who passed away on the journey to Serpo. That takes us back to some of the oldest artwork with the I think Sumerian and Egyptian hieroglyphs of half human, half animal.
Well, to them it was just science. They didn't see anything evil about it. They had the ability to travel all over the galaxy and meet with civilizations all over the galaxy, and they would take parts of the creatures that they found and bring them back to Serpo and use them in their biotechnology experiments. They didn't think there was anything evil about it. To them it was just technology. But our people, of course, had never been exposed to this before. In 1965, we didn't know anything about DNA, really, and we didn't know anything about. To the captain who wrote that in his diary, it was astounding, and he thought it was terrible that they would take two creatures and combine them, the DNA, and create a. But they brought a lot of that information back here, and it became part of our biotechnology here. We learned a lot from that.
Were the depictions of the humans and the alligator head from Egypt? Did that show the that kind of technology was being used to create these hybrids thousands of years ago?
I think the Egyptians were doing it, yes. In fact, there were some things carved in some of the temples that showed creatures like that. There were creatures that had a human body and a bird-like head, and there were all kinds of creatures that are depicted in that are depicted in the hieroglyphics that indicate that the ancient Egyptians knew how to do it, and probably did do it. Did create hybrids like that.
Okay, well, it's just more.
That's not surprising
that
since we know that the ancient Egyptian civilization was an offshoot of Atlantis, and we know that they
right.
had that ability on Atlantis. So that's how they got it, really, because the early Atlanteans were actually extraterrestrials. So that's where it came from.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're just kind of coming full circle as we wrap up the show. Do you have a website or any appearances coming up where you're going to be talking about Dark Fleet or anything you want to publicize?
Yeah, well, I don't have any firm commitments yet to giving presentations, but I have about eight more interviews to go through, and I do have a website. The website is brand new. It's a new website. I just created it recently. I'll give that to you now if you want it.
Sure.
It's called, the name of the website is Alien-Secret History. That's the name of the website. And it's still being constructed. I'm going to add a lot more to it, but I had to come up with a whole new website because the old one was really outdated. And the new website will cover a lot of new things that have not been in my previous website. But that's a beginning anyway. One of the things on the new website are the 3 videos, featured videos. I have 3 featured videos that would be very informative. One of them talks about Corey Goode. Another one talks about the Dark Fleet itself, and the third one talks about is basically an interview with Frank Chille. I don't know if you have you heard of Frank Chille? Chille. You know who he is?
No, I don't.
The third video is an interview with Frank Chille, and it's extremely revealing. So I would recommend that highly. And it talks about Dark Fleet, and but it's not complete. It's still under construction. But anyway, you can go out there and take a look at it.
Okay, and Dark Fleet becomes available next week. Is that right?
Yeah. It's going to be published on March the 10th. The review copies are out there, though. You got one of them, didn't you? Didn't you get one of the review copies? Yeah.
Yes, I have.
You've read that.
It's right in front of me.
Book, right? Okay.
Yes.
So you've read the book, right? And
it's a good one.
But the official publication date is March the 10th, and that's when it will become available on Amazon and on Traditions and also Barnes and Noble.
Okay, so there. Check back next week at those 3 locations to get a copy. It's worth the read.
Well, we're going to be talking again on the 16th, correct? Is that right?
No, you and Barbara are going to be doing that.
That's right. Barbara, yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just. I was really impressed with Dark Fleet, and I enjoyed reading the other 2 books for tonight's show. It's really interesting history of how we can see these patterns of behavior appearing throughout human history, and trace it all back to aliens, and it really doesn't seem like it's a really an out there topic, because it is covered in the Bible as well as Book of Revelation also talks about people living in the ground.
Yeah, that was my purpose in writing that first book, and in writing the Alien World Order, was to give people some perspective that while David Icke did talk about the reptilians, and he was did a lot of great research, the history was necessary of where they came from, why they were here, and what their current interaction is with the human race. That's what I wanted to accomplish with Alien World Order, and I think I was able to do that.
Oh, I think you did, and you successfully argued very valid point that probably a lot of people have wondered about, and we're now all starting to put all the pieces together.
That's right, and we're on the brink of a tremendous technological development, virtually a revolution. It's just around the corner. The computers we have today are going to seem like toys in a couple of years, believe it or not. So we have to talk about that sometime too.
Yeah,
we'll get to that eventually.
You could do that in a couple weeks, and we could about stop there, and not cut you short on getting started on any new topics, since you'll be back in a couple weeks. I just want to thank you for being our guest tonight, and look forward to hearing it on the 16th. And Barbara, do you want to come in and wrap up the show? And hope you have a nice rest of your birthday. And I want to thank you again, Len, for being our fantastic guest.
My pleasure, and happy birthday, Barbara.
Thank you both very, very much. I totally appreciate the well wishes. And thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We so appreciate your sharing your time with us. Please check this out on YouTube and all of our other shows, actually, as well. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe to it. We love to get good numbers there. We have two great shows next week, so watch for us, look for us, and in the meantime, have a great week, good weekend, and join us again next week. Good night now.